Welcome to Hype Hazard, your source for exposing the tech behind the hype. Today's technology landscape is full of innovation, but it's also full of hyperbole.
And in our show, we'll remove those rose-colored glasses, helping you navigate the hazardous data conditions ahead and sidestep all too much tech speak in order to uncover where the real opportunities lie.
So, be you a discerning executive or be you a citizen adopter, this podcast is for you. Now, before we jump into today's tech du jour, and we got a boomer today.
Do we ever?
May we introduce ourselves? I'm Jessica Grootman.
And I'm Jamie Szymanski, and we are technology analysts and founders of Kaleido Insights. We have spent our careers researching new, disruptive technologies and how they impact us all as consumers, how they impact our businesses and society at large.
And along the way, we've seen many gems and a whole lot of junk. And they have changed our lives, we must say, and work as we know it. So in this podcast, we'll share our experience with you, dearest listener, to help you cut through it and put into context the most hyped up technologies for what they really are.
And psst, I'll clue you in on a little secret. They're typically trash. And with that, let's dive in. Today, we'll be talking about deepfakes, or very convincing face-swapping videos and other types of synthetic media that are made with artificial intelligence software and applications. Deepfakes use AI and machine learning algorithms to seamlessly overlay anyone's facial image, well, primarily faces, as we'll be talking about today, into a video that they never actually participated in. Deepfake technology creates an indecipherable, in some cases, an incredibly believable visual with the intention to mislead the audience into thinking that someone else is its subject. It's not simple standard video editing practices that create a different narrative. It's much more than that. Deepfakes emerged in 2017, the year the term was invented by a Reddit user who had the same username, was user Deepfakes, in which the user face-swapped famous actresses' faces into pornography. And more on that later. But to make a truly believable deepfake video of someone, a creator trains what is called an AI neural network. It's basically an artificial intelligence network that acts like the human brain, using a process called GAN. GAN stands for Generative Adversarial Networks, and we won't go too deep into this today. I know very few listeners out there are probably AI developers themselves, but I want you to have a base understanding of GAN. It involves connecting two of these neural networks together, and you train them in tandem. So the first network, we'll call that the generator. That network learns from a database of real images and real video of someone's face, in most cases an actor and actress, how to generate a new or realistic looking fake images of that person. Whereas the second network then, we'll call that one the discriminator. The discriminator is trained to identify real images of that same person from the database of faces that includes some images of the deepfake target, but also a lot of images of other people. So at the most basic fundamental level, GAN, the first network has to learn how to generate fake images that are good enough to fool the second network. And that process continues self-tweaking until what the generator produces is approved by the discriminator. And once that happens, a creator of a deepfake combines that trained network with computer graphics techniques and a ton of processing power to superimpose a copy of the person onto a different actor. And now the code is pretty difficult for the average person to use, I'll say, if you're using GAN. And it requires a ton of data processing, as I mentioned, a lot of talent, a lot of tweaking, a lot of time, if you want to yield something that is actually believable, a believable composite that places a person into an entirely fictional situation. The code that is used by some of these people who create deepfakes that are very believable, it's typically found in these open source code sharing repositories. I think there's about 8 main ones that are used. But if you are not a coder, if you do not have that talent and skill set, there are other options, which I'm sure we'll touch on today. There are a small number of apps that have emerged recently, mostly mobile apps and services that you could use instead. They range in accessibility, so some are pretty cheap. Most require at least about 250 images or videos of that target to train the network, and they range from, there's one called Reface, popular one that's gaining traction called Avatarify, Wombo, and MyHeritage. And I would say, as you sort of compare Yeah, I know, right? The deep fakes using, GAN compared to these apps. These apps are, more shallow fakes, I would say, or I've heard them be called cheap fakes. Yeah, exactly. Whereas what that means is basically they're not meant to be as believable as if you were using code from GitHub or other sources. They're more meant to be satirical, more entertainment purposes, or in the case of MyHeritage, historical recreations of Abraham Lincoln speaking to you.
It's interesting because these GANs, this advanced technique that was developed that has kind of unlocked the capability underlying deepfakes is, as you said, very high compute, requires a lot of technical expertise, but in many ways it's also kind of a convergence of this deep learning boom of, increased computer speed, of better algorithms, bigger data, open access tools, as you said. These digital doppelgangers, if you like, are also bigger than video. We're going to be talking and focusing on video today. And when most people think about deepfakes, they think video, but this capability is also with images generally, with audio and text, with voice data, with all different types of media. And so, it has deep roots in computer-generated imagery, CGI, think like Avatar, Jurassic Park, big Hollywood productions. But the trend is moving faster, cheaper, more technical, more accessible into all different kinds of realms. So it is something that
That's a great point.
We're aware of for many years, for decades in terms of computer-generated imagery. But now we are adding AI into the mix, and that competition between the different algorithms described, as you said, in GANs, they are working to make it better and better and better and better. And so our ability to discern or to discriminate, if you like, between what is real and what is not is increasingly limited. In many ways, the only limitation here is the human imagination itself in terms of dreaming up what can be created with media with anyone's face at this time.
Absolutely. And I think you touched on a good point there, too, as we sort of are defining this technology, is that although the main two camps, I would say, would be deepfakes that are more sophisticated and use GANs compared to those that are more of the cheap fakes, that chasm is getting to be less and less wide over time. Yeah. And I think that as it becomes more accessible to create deepfakes, that's where we're going to see a lot of the hype emerge. At its smallest level, if you're having trouble understanding or visualizing this, listeners, think of Snapchat filters. That's a great example of something that makes you appear as though you're someone else, or it can take someone's face and swap it with your own.
Bunny.
Yes, or a baby, and the baby filter is so cute.
Exactly. That same capability essentially underlying anyone and any face. Now, there has been a lot of hype in this space. 2019 was a huge year for deepfakes for several reasons, and I want to kind of unpack that as well as why now. I see this hype as kind of a proliferation, if you like, of meme culture, political, but also geopolitical tensions, and then the broader techlash that we've all sort of been absorbing in recent years. So I want to kind of talk through each of those. On the meme side, this is where, in many ways, deepfakes have come into the mainstream. Listeners may be familiar. For example, just this year, there was an amazing deepfake of Tom Cruise on TikTok. There's been, we love Nick Cage, who has been his face put into every film, every actor. There are apps that actually do
the Lord of the Rings one I liked a lot.
All characters. Who needs any other actor if you have Nick Cage? Interestingly here, it's playing on meme culture, but a lot of these have been created to actually bring awareness to deepfakes. There was one of Obama that was widely publicized, that was actually voice acted by Jordan Peele as a way to say, hey, this is really real. Here is Obama, leader at the time of the free world, who I can make say anything that I want, as a way to bring awareness, to use kind of internet virality to do that. Now, on the dark side, as you mentioned, this sort of deep porn or revenge porn was actually kind of the first use case, as you said, where it got its name. And so there has been this kind of internet virality campaign for ill and for good around deepfakes. And of course, simultaneously, we have, I say geopolitical and political, but just in the last couple of weeks, there was a case where parliamentarians from Holland, from Latvia, from Estonia, and from Ukraine were actually fooled, were duped by a deepfake video call with the opposition leader, Alexei Navalny, his chief of staff. It's not totally clear if this is a deep fake or a cheap fake. and it may not even matter.
It looked pretty good. I don't know if you saw the side by side, but it looked pretty close.
Right. And one of the kind of pernicious things here is it doesn't have to be perfect to have impact. But this just happened very recently, and so it brought back into the world kind of the immense political risks of this kind of technology for persuading political actors around elections, around national security. Obviously, fake news has been around, and so that's why I say, this is also tied to kind of the tech clash. We saw someone actually create a deep fake of Mark Zuckerberg, kind of peeling the layer back on some of the pernicious parts of Facebook. We've seen bots being used. We talked about how this is not just video, but in many ways, the same simulation technology surrounds these fake viral effects. And, people like regular human internet users can't tell if a viral impact is actually a bunch of humans organically engaging with content or if it is a simulated set of bots. And that same technique is used here. There was a case, I think it was 2019, where a deepfake audio was used to steal $243,000 from a company because the voice of the CEO was used to, say, send this money to a supplier. So all of these examples of, kind of on the what are we going to do about technology and its risks? What is the legal? What is the policy? What is the platform's obligation here? As well as a huge political and geopolitical risks around what is actually true and real? How does that impact diplomatic relations and world events? There's a lot of fear around kind of nuclear potential here of things spiraling out of control. If, say, a video of the leader of a nuclear armed state is in a deep fake and that suddenly causes a cascade reaction, as well as this kind of weird meme culture that we're all existing in that's spreading around in the mainstream to get people more aware.
Right. And I think we're really balancing here the difference between what is current and what's happening right now, what is reality versus a lot of what we explore in Hype Hazard is what could happen in the future and what are some of the potential future implications. I mean, I thought it was interesting looking at some of the laws that have been proposed and are currently, proposed amendments, I should say, as well, around deepfakes. And one of the key questions asked in one of them, it's called the Deepfakes Accountability Act, is from a legal and legislative perspective, what is the difference between a malicious deepfake video and one for satire, parody, or entertainment? Because a lot of what you're discussing here, Jess, I mean, at least the current use cases in meme culture we're all living in, it is the latter. It is about parody, satire, and entertainment. And even the very talented developer who created the Tom Cruise viral video said the same, that he's willing to release 80-90% of what he's doing in the code and his process, but he's not willing to release the last percentage of it because it requires a ton of talent and tricks that he thinks that if they fall into the wrong hands, it could really enable some of these more nefarious use cases you're discussing.
Yeah. The legal aspect generally, it's interesting exploring the hazards here because sort of counterintuitively, perhaps, China is actually one of the only countries in the world, an authoritarian country, an autocracy, that requires the labeling use of AI and has outlawed the use of deepfakes. Now, there's not a free speech movement in China the way that there is here in the US. And so is that the right answer? Do we want sort of one source of truth in terms of what media is real and to be believed? And of course, here we have tons of precedent for free speech, which includes
absolutely right.
Media, voice, videos, etc. So, interestingly, here in California as well as in Texas, they have actually passed two laws, but very specific. We talk about use case kind of legislation or policy, and these laws say that deepfakes are prohibited for political candidates within 60 or 90 days, there's state difference there, before election. So one example of a law, but as we're talking about, there's so many different use cases.
Right. And I'm not even sure that the right use cases are being addressed in current law. I mean, you mentioned Texas and California in terms of political use cases of deepfakes, but that is like minuscule compared to the largest criminalized use of it, which is to create non-consensual pornography. So I think it's only the state of Virginia right now that has a law that's put into place that deepfakes cannot be used for non-consensual pornography. And I believe California does have a small provision too. But other laws, as you mentioned, if they're focusing on politics, or New York has a law too that's focused only on using someone who is deceased and their image in a likeness that was not approved. But we've run into this issues many times before in the news, and we've seen, movie production studios use someone's likeness, or even concerts use someone's likeness who has since passed, and they end up being sued because their family or their estate did not approve of that. And we also have precedent, I think, that has been set in general photoshopping, right? And this opens up a whole can of worms in terms of what we can trust and what we can't trust in media. And so I think that, as we're unpacking the hazards of deepfakes here, I think it would be great to kick this off with a quote from Deborah Johnson. Now, Deborah Johnson is the emeritus professor of applied ethics at the University of Virginia, one of the states that does have a law against deepfakes. She says this is in response to the three forms of harm. There's potential harm to the viewer, there's potential harm to the subject of the deepfake, and there's a broader harm to society in undermining trust. And that last one, in terms of society undermining trust, that's where we get into misinformation in media, which, like I said, we can unpack that all together. But first, I think that the clearest threat and the biggest threat posed by deepfakes right now is to women in terms of non-consensual pornography. I was looking at some data, and I honestly had no idea until I started looking at this, because we always focus on, oh my gosh, what if it caused some political upheaval? What if it, the cybersecurity breaches or just general spread of misinformation? But in reality, non-consensual pornography accounts for 96%. You heard me, 96% of all deepfakes currently deployed on the internet. And yes, although most target celebrities, there are an increasing number of reports of deepfakes being used to create what you mentioned, fake revenge porn. And it's a huge problem when you think of, God, I couldn't even imagine how it plays with identity and agency by someone taking over someone else and making them do things or putting them in situations they never would have done. So this really unpacks, yes, identity, agency, and also issues of non-consent.
Well, and there's another sort of extremely dark, as if we could get even darker, but here we're going on the show. As the technology requires less and less training data, which is a general trend in AI and absolutely a trend with deepfakes. What that means is that we're not just talking about celebrities, executives, politicians, folks with high profiles. One of the reasons that they are a target is because, well, they're valuable for several different reasons, but also because they have a huge digital footprint. They have huge media coverage. There's tons of data to use to train the algorithms.
Well, the Tom Cruise creator of those deepfakes, 25,000 videos he based it on. So
and those, those are some of the most compelling videos I have ever seen as a deepfake.
Me too.
But as the trend goes down, and there are examples here, that already in existence today and definitely in the lab where, less than 100, less than 50 images are required, even in, less than 10 in certain cases. We're not just talking about high profile figures. We're talking about anyone, you or me, our kids. And so this raises yet another.
Thought about that too.
This is true. This is exactly how the technology is going. And so it raises yet another kind of huge hazard of reputation generally, reputation of children before they're even of legal age, and our inability to discern what is real, what is fake. And, it's one thing to kind of be like lawyered up as a high profile figure and be able to fight these and use digital forensics in court, et cetera, et cetera. It's quite another to be, the vast majority of people on the planet who do not have those kinds of resources to fight off these cases. That's just another hazard given the kind of trajectory of the technology as it requires less and less data for training.
Yeah, you read my mind there. That's what I was thinking about prior to us discussing this today is what about younger generations, the TikTok generation, Twitch streamers, YouTube influencers and stars who are absolutely not considering these future implications of having hundreds of videos and images readily available for a deepfake creator. And I think that calls into question who is responsible to protect people. Is it government? So we see it at a state level in the United States right now, or country level, as you mentioned, in other places globally, or does it, fall on the platform? So is it a government thing? Is it a private company thing? Or I should say, is it also just general citizen education and parental education about sharing videos and images online? I don't think people quite know what a threat it is yet, but as we're seeing more of these apps get better and better at creating deepfakes versus cheap fakes, we're going to see this a lot more in the news.
Yeah, and the kind of old motto of "it takes a village" is never more true with these kinds of technology-driven impacts. And digital literacy, and for that matter, online safety for everyone of all ages, is a shared responsibility. It's very, very difficult to know kind of who is responsible for what part of that, defense mechanism. There's another piece here around, as we talk about defense and law and sort of how to manage this, if you start to think about some of the examples, like, for example, there are cases where deep learning enabled bots have actually attacked public commentary on policy, undermining what we take as, critical to the democratic process, undermining public participation into how, we come up with new policies. We can't even tell. You can actually take a quiz online. This is unbelievable. I did it. What was a bot and what was a human commenting on a policy or creating a video on a policy? You can't tell. And so there's that. There's also, as evidence is increasingly able to be, dreamed up, what does that mean for the justice process? What does it mean for digital forensics? And who has access to those, how they are used, how that extends, what is often very long court processes anyway. So the entire impact on this in terms of getting to the truth through our traditional institutions, as well as policymaking from the beginning, like organic policymaking, is very unclear. Not to mention, one thing that I think is fascinating is this idea, sometimes touted as a good use case for deepfakes, of kind of holographic people. Maybe I can bring back my lost grandfather.
Right.
And what kind of legal implications does that have? What kind of mental health implications? What is this like?
Well, and I've seen both. That's interesting you bring that one up. I think the MyHeritage app, I was reading a few reviews and some people said, yeah, it was amazing getting to, basically take an old photo of my grandfather and have him be moving and smiling in the picture, and it was really healing. Whereas other people said they tried it with their past friends and loved ones, and they found it incredibly jarring and very not good for mental health. But I do want to back up too to something that you're talking about there about evidence and what this does to our judicial process in general. And I came across an interesting term that some of you listeners may be familiar with or maybe not, called the liar's dividend, which is kind of a fancy way of saying that, the very existence of deepfakes provides cover for anyone to do anything they want because they can dismiss evidence of wrongdoing as a deepfake. So it's kind of this one-size-fits-all plausible deniability to say, no, that's not true. That wasn't me in that video. Now that deepfakes exist and as they get better and better and easier to create, the liar's dividend becomes much larger in terms of criminal activity and people just saying, no, that wasn't me. That evidence isn't accurate.
Right. The existence of fake media undermining the truth of authentic media, or information for that matter, not just media. That actually happened with the George Floyd video as well, by a politician, no less. So there's a lot that needs to change here, needless to say. And just in this year, in March of 2021, the FBI issued a warning saying, quote, malicious actors almost certainly will leverage synthetic content, including deepfakes, for cyber and foreign influence operations in the next 12 to 18 months. So we have sort of the red lights flashing. What do we do and what really needs to change? Now, we've talked about here the trajectory of the technology a little bit and how just in the last 3 years, we've gone from a single face or someone's face, but essentially kind of a 2D rendering to a 3D head to now more and more research being done on how to actually take an entire body and map that onto a target person.
That's terrifying, the doors that opens up, Jess.
And not just video, as we've talked about, voice and language and sound and music and art and gaming, more on kind of gaming and the growing convergence with social media and influencer culture and all of these other pieces that are simultaneously evolving. This is all part of our media ecosystem. And deepfakes, is not just specific to any one media. It is an underlying capability. So we already find ourselves in this kind of crisis of trust, right? Of decision making, of privacy and identity, of what is real and what is fake, and cybersecurity. And we talked about how it takes a village, but it also takes a kind of maybe patchwork isn't the right word because that says they're not connected, but a multiple
multi-pronged
strategies.
approach.
There you go. Thank you. And so, looking at the technical side, for example, there's been a huge drive towards deep fake detection using, lots of different ways. Every day, there are new techniques, new features, new forms of digital forensics that are being used. And then, by the way, this is a cat and mouse where you have new deepfake detection capabilities that are then met with new deepfake, techniques.
Right. They're basically gamed to create more convincing deepfakes, which is why it's under such lock and key. A lot of these deepfake detectors, they don't want to really say how it works because then deepfakes will learn how to beat it.
Exactly.
And to your point too about the most recent, I think you said FBI report, for the US here, they know that the use of deepfakes will be used in the near future. I saw literally just yesterday it was reported military in the US begin to develop what they call deepfake hop, which is a lightweight, high performance deepfake detector for military and intelligence purposes to be used by soldiers, commanders, etc. on the ground in a military context to make sure that they are not being duped by deepfakes that could threaten the security and the safety of the soldiers and of the US. So I think we are starting to see these solutions being developed based on individual goals. So the goal of the DoD is to keep the nation safe and to keep soldiers safe and to not compromise intelligence. So they have developed their own tool. While we see Facebook has recruited many researchers to develop a deepfake detector as well as YouTube has too. So I think that beyond those two walled gardens, we're also seeing something a little bit bigger. There's a new deepfake detector called Reality Defender, which I find very interesting. That kind of works like a spam filter. So right now, how Gmail or any other email tool you might use automatically filters out spam email, a Reality Defender would do the same for deep fakes, just to kind of keep them away. And in order to do that, interesting, they analyze deep fakes on 3 different types of integrity. One is digital integrity. So that's defined by the patterns in an image's pixels that are invisible to the human eye. So this would be patterns that arise from cameras or video processing software. Any inconsistencies, a little pixelation you might see that are a tip-off. So it looks at those. It looks at the physical integrity, which refers to consistency in lighting, shadows, and other attributes of the image or video. And then finally, semantic integrity, which considers the broader context. So for example, if a video shows an outdoor scene, a deepfake detector might check the timestamp and location and look up a weather report from that time and place to try to see if it's a deepfake. So I think that it's interesting that a lot of these are using very complex methods to detect deepfakes, but even knowing, for example, in this deepfake detector's case of Reality Defender, what it's using, if you were a nefarious individual who was creating deepfakes, you would use that to create a better deepfake, to your point. So.
Layering technology on top of technology can be fraught. And it's indeed, and there are blockchain applications too of, for example, using an immutable ledger to register the actions.
Like a watermark. I've seen that.
Yeah. Or a watermark of the content itself or the publication itself, or even of the high profile individual. So if you are a politician, you can register onto the blockchain that you are here interacting with this person at this time and therefore not there on the simulated media. Now, fraught, again, with privacy implications, with security implications, but is another example of, these technological solutions not being a silver bullet. We have to think broader about this. We talked about some of the legal solutions as well, but frankly, I think that this is, we're talking about human brains. This is a societal and educational challenge as much as anything. A lot of the deepfakes that we talked about have been, at least on the meme side of things, to drive awareness, but how do we really crack the challenge of digital literacy, the challenge of thinking about critical thinking as a skill to be ingrained, not just, to advance in our careers or whatever, or in life, but as a weapon against manipulation. Thinking about what is healthy skepticism versus what is biased cynicism, going back to what you talked about with the liar's dividend, right? Like, how do we contend with these challenges of trying to discern truth from reality? And that is not necessarily only a technical or even only a legal or policy solution. Like, this is one of the areas where, as you said, it takes parents. It takes
I agree. And then what impact does it have as these apps get better and better? and don't have, proper guardrails in place. We haven't even touched on that at all. I don't know if we'll have time today, but what does that show future generations if they can easily download an app and it's meant to be fun and entertainment to create deep fakes? They're learning these skills and they're learning that it's okay to create fake synthetic media in order to, like I said, for entertainment purposes or just to be fun. And what does that teach them in terms of understanding what's real and fake in the future and not labeling everything with this automatic skepticism that it's not real?
Right.
Well, and with that, Jess, I think that, we've covered a lot today.
Think it's that time, Jamie.
Yeah, it's that time. This is a big thing to unpack here. And in this portion of the show, listeners, as you might be familiar with, we rate the technology that we've been talking about for the last half hour or so. We have 4 different ratings to choose from. The first is trash. That is just garbage. Garbages abound in techland, so buyer beware. Flash is a flash in the pan, so hot now, but fleeting once it exhausts early adopters. Cash, money-making, scalable potential, of course. So the cash is a priority, but really nothing super innovative going on here. And finally, Splash. That would be a technology that is fundamentally innovative and just full of transformative potential to fix a real problem. So Jess, when examining everything out there and the future of deepfakes, what would you rate?
Deepfakes are a splash. As far as I'm concerned, we've talked about how a splash may not necessarily be a morally positive or negative thing. There are obviously tremendous risks around deepfake technology, but it's hard to not see how this is not a profound shift in how we view media. In many ways, the internet has already disrupted media as an industry, as a format, as a distribution, and now we have kind of a net new revolution underway with this in terms of what is real and what is not. It shatters the old aphorism that seeing is believing. There's some promising use cases here is too. We didn't get too much into that today, but certainly I think regardless, deepfakes as a technology capability are going to have a huge impact on our society, on businesses, and on how we as individuals think about what is true and what is not.
Interesting. I always love this ratings section because sometimes I see such a huge chasm between these ratings, and sometimes I think it's subjective for me. So I was going back and forth, I'll tell you, between trash and splash.
Woo!
I really was. And honestly, I landed on trash.
All right.
I did, because here's why. I think that when we really unpack the current and the potential use cases of deepfakes, I don't think that the positive and negative are even close to equally weighted. I think there are some positive use cases, sure, in movie special effects production. Even I was thinking about some learning or teaching applications could be really cool. Entertainment, sure, satire, etc. Although I agree with you that splash means it's fundamentally innovative, and this is. The fact that the overwhelming majority of it right now is being used in a non-consensual way, it's really difficult for me to rate it anything but trash as it currently sits. And I think, okay, so potential use cases, sure, overthrowing a government or some cybersecurity fraud or misinformation. So that's why I landed at trash.
Destroying reputations, anyone?
Right. Although I do understand that the innovation itself is splash. And I think we had a similar conversation on a past episode on Clearview
Indeed.
AI too. Yep, it's kind of hard.
Not unrelated, yep.
Absolutely. Well, that's wonderful. Thanks so much for the conversation today, Jess. And thank you, listeners. Join us next time for Hype Hazard, where we continue to expose the tech behind the hype. And in the meantime, feel free to check out all of our content on new and emerging technology impacts at kaleidoinsights.com. We'd also like to thank Randall Ward for our sound editing and Adam Roskowitz, who composed our music and sound effects. Until next time, listeners, cheers.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.